Good morning, everyone. Just going to wait a minute or two whilst everybody joins in, and then we'll get started. Okay, looks like we've got pretty much everybody, so we're going to get started. So, firstly, happy Thursday for everybody, and I hope you're all enjoying the beautiful weather we've got here in the UK at the moment. Let's hope it lasts. So, let's get started. Today's session: inside a social engineering attack and how supply chain breaches really happen in the real world. So, today's agenda. Firstly, we're going to go over a little bit about myself, introducing myself. We'll go over some quick definitions so that everybody is on the same level when I go over some of the terminology throughout this presentation. We'll go over some of the key statistics that are currently plaguing the cybersecurity industry and the general industry that we see. We've also got some of the reasoning behind that. We'll have a quick overview of a modern organization's structure, and we'll go over some example social engineering attacks, and then we'll wrap up with some practical takeaways. All right. So to get started, we've got a little bit about myself. So I am Karl McAree. I am the head of technical development at Mitigo Group. Our strategic partner, for many cybersecurity services. And you can find our information obviously on our website, and you can reach out to us directly via LinkedIn if you ever need to chat to us. I personally have over 10 years in the cybersecurity industry, and some of my hobbies include gymnastics. I like to think I'm still 20. We've got software development. I like to build software to help solve and automate business challenges. And like many of the parents probably on this webinar, I do enjoy embarrassing my children. So let's jump into some of the quick definitions so that we all understand some of the terminology that we're going to be going through in today's session. So we've got the first one is OSINT, so it's open source intelligence. So this is the gathering of information on a target from public sources, usually includes things like Google Docs or social media crawling, essentially anything that is in the public space. You could think it could be as simple as going over somebody's LinkedIn profile, or it could be having a look at their Facebook profile to build and gather information on that individual, or it could be an entity, maybe looking at a company's website, a company's LinkedIn profile, finding out as much information as you can about them to help aid you in a subsequent attack. We've then got social engineering. Now, social engineering is kind of like an umbrella, and it kind of includes a lot of the additional definitions that we see here, like phishing, vishing, impersonation, and there are some more other ishings that are under this umbrella, but I do want to focus on the phishing, which is probably the one that I should imagine most of you are familiar with. And this type of attack is usually by email, and they come in many forms, of course, some more sophisticated than others. Traditionally, I think we're all aware of the old ones that happened around sort of like the late 90s, the sort of emails from the Nigerian prince, whereas now in modern day, they're getting a little bit more sophisticated. They might be a SharePoint file being shared with you, or it might be a free coffee voucher, things like that. We've also got vishing, which is essentially voice phishing. So the act of trying to solicit information from a target over the phone, usually used in combination with impersonation, which we're going to touch on a little bit more later in the examples that I'm going to go over. But essentially the impersonation is, as you can imagine, pretending to be somebody you're not in order to get sensitive information from the target. Now, ransomware, I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with this term. But we're also going to go a little bit further with ransomware as a service. So ransomware in itself is just malware or malicious code specifically designed to either prevent access to an infected system's data. Users are usually then prompted to pay to unlock the system, usually in crypto. And actually, the average ransom payment, I think in 2024, was something like 1.5 million, which is a hefty amount. Now, ransomware as a service is where gangs or underground hacker groups have now made this a business model whereby anyone can have access to the infrastructure in place to run a ransomware attack on a given target, much like you would consider like a Netflix subscription. You can pay to a ransomware as a service to gain access to this and then go about your way and start attacking targets. Now, supply chain attacks, of course, these different variations on this, but for the purposes of this presentation, I'll be focusing on attacks that leverage SaaS vendors, that's software as a service. So much like I just said in the example of Netflix, is where you are usually paying a subscription or paying a contract term for a vendor to have access to their software. And of course, MSPs, managed service providers. I should imagine that most of you on the webinar are probably familiar with this, and your most common one would be your IT supplier. So with those definitions out the way, let's start jumping into some key statistics. So around 43% of UK businesses experienced a cyber breach or attack over the last 12 months, which is an astounding amount, so almost half of the UK businesses as a whole. And then furthermore, we've got 55% of professional and scientific and technology firms who identified attacks in the last 12 months. 85% of all of those attacks included phishing. So again, that phishing sitting under that social engineering attack vector. So they're still showing that phishing remains one of the more favorable methods of trying to gain entry into a target organization. We've then got 34% of all businesses were also experiencing impersonation attempts, which is sharply rising then as you grow into the medium-sized organizations, up to a whopping 64%. We've also got just 14% of businesses that are actually reviewing the risks posed by their immediate suppliers. So whilst we've got the social engineering aspects on the rise, we've actually got organizations only just scratching the surface in terms of analyzing their immediate supplier risk. Now, if you do want to reference or have a look at some of the additional statistics, these are all from the Cybersecurity Breaches Survey 2025, which you can find on the government website. There's a huge document there, lots of good information, but it's a long read. All right. So what are some of the reasonings behind these trends? Well, let's start off with everybody's favorite buzzword, and that's AI. So AI has been a significant factor in recent advancements in technology, just in general. We've all seen it on the news and socials everywhere. So it makes sense that attackers themselves have also been leveraging AI. AI has helped lower the barrier of entry for many would-be attackers, meaning you don't necessarily need to be a very technical individual anymore to perform certain attacks. You can leverage things like ChatGPT or Claude or even things like Copilot to help essentially build things for you and help explain things for you. You could specifically use this with social engineering campaigns when you're looking to craft well-formed phishing emails. Historically, one of the key giveaways for phishing emails was always bad grammar, maybe bad English, typos, things like that. Obviously, if you're a non-native English speaker, so maybe we're looking at like gangs coming out of Russia or China or North Korea, that was obviously usually a giveaway in some of these phishing email campaigns. However, now they can fire their prompts through the likes of ChatGPT and come out the other side with perfect English, perfect grammar, and perfectly formed phishing campaign. We've also got, on the other side of things, we're moving away from phishing email, we've got things like deepfakes and voice cloners. Now, deepfakes, for those that aren't familiar, this is where usually you would use AI to mask somebody else's face, so kind of on top of your face. And just as a reference, one of the key ways to identify if somebody's using that, if you ever happen to be on a call, is you can simply ask them to put their hand in front of the face, much like I'm doing now. And usually what you'll see is the deepfake start to ripple as it tries to match to the hand rather than the face. So that's a quick way to identify it. But we're seeing more and more cases of these being used in attacks. One of the more notable examples that we saw was actually from Hong Kong for a financial institute with a sum of around 25 million, and that's dollars, was transferred to a scammer that was using a deep fake. I believe the story goes that he was impersonating a financial director or something. So it shows that it's being used out there in the wild, and it is indeed very, very real. Voice cloners, of course, kind of goes without saying, but making your voice sound like somebody else's, particularly useful when used with phishing attacks. You could perhaps dial up and leave a voicemail message impersonating perhaps a company's CEO, asking for an immediate transfer of funds as they're heading into an important meeting, trying to drive a sense of urgency in order to exploit the individual on the other end of the phone. We've also got affiliate hackers. So what is an affiliate hacker? So what we're seeing is, apologies. What we're seeing is, sorry, I just lost my, there we go. Well, what we're seeing is young, tech-savvy, native English-speaking teens actually being drawn into hacker groups as affiliates. So essentially, the two parties are forming a sort of partnership whereby, let's say, a hacking group in Russia might leverage teens in the UK to use their English native skills for impersonation attempts. The hacker group in Russia might be supplying the infrastructure and the technical capabilities, whilst they'll leverage the teen to perform the actual social engineering aspect to actually infiltrate and gain access to an organization. And then once they're in, they might pass that access over to the group, obviously in exchange for funds, maybe, or maybe just sometimes for fun rather than funds. We've seen some groups whereby obviously crypto has exchanged hands between the two entities. And usually what happens then is should there be any sort of legal repercussions to the teen, obviously they're a minor, so the implications are a little bit less than they would be if they were an adult. We've also got the structure of modern organizations and their supply chain. So the supply chain kind of is everywhere now, and it's a hot topic in the news and socials. Many of us use software as a service. As an example, I'm sure many of you on this webinar could think about how many streaming services you're paying for. Perhaps you've got Netflix, perhaps you've got Prime, perhaps you've got Disney Plus. Now, each one of those are holding elements of your data, and if they were breached and were to suffer an attack, you would essentially be breached by proxy. And we're seeing that more and more in terms of the business world, where the suppliers are being breached, and then as a result, many organizations are kind of hit in the blast radius of that attack. And if we also expand that further into MSPs, this essentially increases the attack service for a single organization. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at a quick example of what that might look like. So in the middle, we've got our Acme legal entity. And by the way, this is a simplified example. This obviously could grow and grow and grow depending on your organization size. But just for the sake of this presentation, this is a fairly simplified view. And as you can see down the left-hand side, they've got multiple SaaS vendors. They might have, case management system. They might use a CRM, maybe a document sharing vendor. They might have something specific for their accounting. And again, all of these have varying levels of access to your organization. They also have varying levels of data on your organization. We've also got on the other side, we've got the IT managed service provider. So of course, in this example, Acme Legal is leveraging their MSP to provide their IT infrastructure. And each one of these key elements is forming an additional vector in the supply chain, which the attacker could leverage as a point of attack. Worth mentioning here that your IT MSP, of course, under the hood, they're of course using SaaS providers themselves. So they've got support case management systems. They've also got, Microsoft 365 under the hood. So then again, if one of those suppliers was going to be attacked or breached, again, it would then provide access then to the end MSP, which could then be used to daisy chain on towards the end organization. Now, each one of these is possessing a different level of risk, and each one, again, is a potential target for an attacker. Now, historically, we saw attackers would just go directly to the source. If they wanted to attack Acme Legal, they would just go directly to Acme Legal. But now we've also seen examples whereby they might look to attack the accounting software. The amount of effort that is put into that attack, then if you think that attacker was to breach the accounting software, they wouldn't just necessarily get access to Acme Legal. They might also get access to another legal entity as well as another. And then in terms of their return of investment is significantly higher. Equally, they could do the same thing for your IT MSP. So obviously, organizations in general are often incredibly reliant on their managed service provider for security. But as we saw earlier on the statistics, only 14% of organizations are actually reviewing the immediate suppliers, meaning that the other 86% are just trusting the MSPs are doing as they say, and just trusting whether they're potentially marking their own homework or not. So let's break down what an attack might look like in an organizational structure much like this. So here we have, first of all, our attacker. Now, the first step that they will do is their OSINT. So remember from earlier on in the slides, that is open source intelligence. So gathering that freely available information about the target. They'll be looking to generate a pretext. So this is essentially creating a persona, creating a character with a reason to make a call or interact with an individual at that target organization. So is it possible that this organization is using internal IT, or are they also using an external managed service provider? So with the help of the pretext generation, in this example, our attacker is going to impersonate help desk. Now, some of us have maybe experienced this or seen this before in the past. So what we might see is a persona being used where the help desk would dial into a given user, and they would say, we are something along the lines of, we are making changes to our IT systems, or we are looking to move your account from one piece of infrastructure to another, or we just need to quickly reset your account for whatever reason. All of these kind of stressing a sense of urgency. And then it has the person on the other end of the line to help hopefully look to bypass things like MFA tokens. So let's assume that our attacker is successful. And they've gone in and targeted this end user, said, look, we need to move your account. User says, sure, sounds good. I'm just about to go on to lunch, hands over their details. And then now successfully, our attacker has valid credentials to now access the corporate network. Now, with that access, the attacker usually will do one of two things. Number one, they'll either look to do ransomware attack, trying to implement software on the corporate network, or they'll look to extract data, things like PII data, and maybe look to post it on the dark web for sale later on. So they can also do things like privilege escalation, which is assuming that that user was perhaps maybe, let's say it was just the receptionist. Obviously, the access that receptionist might have might be different to someone who works in finance. They might then use that account to then pivot onto a more valuable account. Now, obviously, the result here is pretty terrible, resulting in ransomware and data exfiltration. And essentially, without the user being aware or necessarily prepared to identify such an attack, this could have catastrophic impacts to the organization. So we've got another example which is more or less the same at the start. So again, attacker is generating that pretext, started with the open source intelligence, but this time we're going to switch things around. So rather than attacking the end user directly, this time we're using a user persona to attack the MSP help desk. So in this context, the attacker might use a persona saying something along the lines of, "Hi, I'm in a rush. I've got a very, very important meeting down in, in central London. I'm just about to jump onto the tube, and I'm currently locked out of my account. Can you help me do a password reset or something like that in order to gain access to my account so I can get my presentation ready for my super important meeting?" Now, obviously, the help desk persona, again, if this help desk individual is not prepared to identify or validate what is being said to them on the phone, the attacker could successfully then gain access and get valid credentials once again to the corporate network. And the thing is, with both of these attacks, both of them end up with valid credentials being leveraged to gain access to the corporate network, which means that things like technical controls aren't necessarily going to come into play here and will essentially slip straight under the radar. Okay, so in this both examples, both of the organizations would now be experiencing a live incident and would be heavily leveraging their incident response functionality, whether that's their BCP or DR documentation that they may have. And I should imagine they're feeling pretty stressed. So what are some of the practical takeaways on how to deal with some of these attacks? To make a quote from boxing or boxing analogy, so everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And you can kind of apply that here in a sense that you can't necessarily you can't necessarily prepare for a boxing match just by reading theory and reading policy documentation. It doesn't quite work. You need to have real world practice, but in a safe environment. That's why boxers use things like sparring. So for things like this, you can use phishing tests, you can use tabletop exercises and simulations, you can use a vishing scenarios whereby you can prepare your organization to identify these types of attacks. Second practical takeaway is anyone can fall for these types of attacks. And I very much want to stress that that means absolutely anyone. Even security professionals can fall for them. Given the right timing and given the right pretext, it is very easy for anyone to fall for such an attack. If they catch you just before you're going into a meeting, obviously you're heightened, you're stressed, or maybe, I don't know, worst case scenario, you've got just had a car accident. Let's say, for example, you're absolutely not thinking straight. Given the right timing, they might be able to catch you then, and you're not necessarily thinking straight. And I would also like to stress when I say anyone, I also mean senior leaders as well. There's many organizations that tend to focus on training general staff, but they won't necessarily look to train senior leaders like the CEOs, the CROs, things like that. You have to lead by example. The C-suite of an organization are the most favored targets for these type of attacks, obviously due to their access and what they have available to them. So you guys are definitely on the hit list for attackers. So it makes sense that you guys need to really up your game in terms of training. Now, the third practical takeaway that we want to drive home here is stop, question, verify. So this is all in relation to out-of-band validation. If you're presented with an email or a phone call or even a text message from someone that's claiming to be either inside your organization or related to your organization, asking for information that might seem a little bit out of the ordinary, check in with others within the organization to help validate that story. So use a different channel to do so. So if they've contacted you, for example, in the attack that I showed earlier, they're contacting you via phone, say don't give them any information immediately, hang up, and then if you need to, call them back. In parallel, drop a message to someone who might know that individual or might know the IT supplier. Oh, ask somebody else, did IT call you up and ask for password resets recently? No? Okay, that's a bit strange. validate the story that you're being told. Okay. And lastly, independent oversight and assurance. So, supply chain due diligence questionnaires can be leveraged to understand everyone in your supply chain and their obligations. It is all too common, unfortunately, that during an incident that an organization will find out that maybe their IT MSP or any supplier uh, was not actually doing what they were claiming to do. And that is definitely the worst time to find that out. So do your due diligence, assess your supply chain, validate that they are doing what they're saying, and understand their obligations to you as an entity. So I think that pretty much concludes most of my slides. So what I want to do now is I'm going to pause for some questions. I'm just going to have a look on the chat. The first question I can see here, we've got, you mentioned AI. We are using this more and more in our business. Is there anything we should be doing internally to train our staff? A good question. So, first things that you could be doing is having an AI policy for your organization is always a good start. Going over things like acceptable usage, outlining which AI can be used. Maybe you've got a preferred vendor. Equally, what you can and can't use AI for. You need to also discuss what controls you want to put in place around that particular AI vendor processing your data. Many of them have, depending on which licensing tier you would go choose to use, would have various controls about what your data can and can't be used for as a result of conversations you have with it. Next question we've got. Would any technology or software I purchase identify and prevent a social engineering attack that you discussed? So it's unlikely. So as I mentioned earlier, at best, I believe that maybe some behavioral monitoring solutions might raise a flag when the attacker starts to run commands or looks to actually implement the ransomware. But at that point, they're already in. They've already got access to your organization. The best strategy to defend against this is actually having that human prevent the entry point at the start. So much like I said, where the help desk persona was attacking the user, having that user well trained and kind of prepared for that potential attack would help stop it immediately. Next question we've got, are these types of attacks new? No, so social engineering itself is not new. It's been around for many years. But what we are seeing is that attackers are choosing to target organizations in your supply chain instead of going directly. That's more of a new trend at the moment. How do I know if my IT MSP is prepared to deal with these types of attacks? Well, for starters, Mitigo can help you perform things like supplier assurance, as I mentioned in the final takeaways there. So going through those exercises to help understand the risk that each of your suppliers pose to your organization, and just understanding again those obligations that they have to you. And we've got some more questions. Can you suggest ways to? Oh, that's the same question. So can you suggest ways to validate suppliers from the cyber due diligence? So yes, it's same answer as before. So again, you can do Mitigo can do supplier assurance exercises to help you understand those risks. I think that is all of my questions. So if there is no more questions, what I want to do then is I'm going to move on to a quick poll. So if anyone's interested in having a quick chat with us here, got 60 minutes conversation. So the poll should be going live now on the webinar. I'll leave that up for a few seconds just to give everybody a chance to answer. Fantastic. And then lastly, if you want to speak to us directly, there is a QR code on screen now where you can reach out to us directly for a chat about if you're concerned about any of the types of attacks that I went over, or whether it's supplier assurance, whether it's phishing, vishing, social engineering, anything at all. Please reach out to us. We're always happy to help. Or if you're experiencing an issue right now, again, we are happy to help and jump on the phone. So with that, I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all for your attention today, and wishing you all the best. Have a great weekend. Bye bye.